welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica. I'm your host today, and I am here with an author who writes books that fly off of our shelves. And so I'm very grateful to have her here. And we're going to talk about her newest book called Famous Last Words. So without any further ado, Gillian McAllister, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where this book came from?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Gillian McAllister. I live in Worcestershire in the UK, which is kind of in the middle. And my latest release is Famous Last Words, which tells the story of a woman who realizes that her husband is at the center of a hostage situation in London, but that he hasn't been taken hostage, but he is in fact the gunman.
And not only that, but she's also a new mother, and she's just dropping her daughter off at daycare before she finds all of this out. And as she's leaving, her husband Luke has written like this very cryptic note for her before he left, which any normal person, even, would just be like, oh, that's nice, but also what exactly does that mean? And as you mentioned, pretty quickly on, there's a hostage situation, and she just knows Luke is involved somehow, and he's not involved in the way that one would think. So I'm curious about this book and just kind of where the idea for it all came from, because it is a really interesting premise. I've been a fan of books where the protagonist is a new mother for a while, probably because I just somewhat remember the flux of that time period for myself. And, I'm curious about where it came from, how you decided that Cam was or Camilla was going to be a new mother, and just the whole scenario.
Yeah, sure. I wrote it while on maternity leave. Although I didn't obviously have a maternity leave because I wrote a novel. And I too was very interested in kind of exploring the vulnerabilities of that time and the sort of feeling that you don't have much headspace and your relationship has changed. And you already feel like you're juggling too much. And I kind of wanted to throw a character into a situation where she already had too much on her plate and then she suddenly got a whole load more. And also, it was interesting to me to ponder the notion of whether Luke had done what he'd done because they had just had a baby and he was, she was a difficult baby and maybe they were both quite stressed. And could this kind of be part of the explanation, which is one of the first things that Camilla considers? And as to the idea generally, I think I have been kind of wanting to write about taking like a big action thriller trope, like a hostage situation, and kind of applying it to the female experience. So it wasn't like, it's not shootouts and explosions, but it's a more domestic look at it. And it's sort of examining a hostage situation, but through the lens of possibly a failing marriage. That's kind of what I wanted to do with it.
It was really interesting, and I liked just sort of the way that you broke the book up. You broke it up into The Siege, which is sort of like the at the moment as things were unfolding, and then you jumped 7 years in the future to kind of deal with the aftermath, because the whole situation, I don't want to say too much, but it wasn't resolved after the hostage situation altogether. And it was just a really interesting way of looking at everything, because on one hand you have Camilla and she's wondering who this person is, who she just had a child with, who she's been married to, who is now holding hostages. And, like, could I have missed something? And then you have, is it Niall or is it Neil?
Yeah, it's
It's
Niall.
Niall. This is where my American,
Yeah.
pronunciation kind of comes in and is uh, not sure where I was reading it correctly, but yeah, Niall, the hostage negotiator who's called in to sort of help resolve this, and his take on the whole thing. And I liked that you kind of saw Luke from two different sides, and it was very nuanced because you're in Camilla's head and you're just like, who is Luke now? Like, why would he do this? What does this mean? This note mean? And then you have Niall, who this is his job. This is what he's called in to do. And he's not, he's, finds himself sort of, I guess, out of his own depth in a way. So those characters in general, did he come into the story sort of later as, for that other view, or was it always supposed to be told from different perspectives?
Yeah, I did always want to do like a dual perspective because I kind of wanted to explore the idea that if you're law abiding, you're not against the police generally. And I think, but Cam suddenly felt like you're, she could help the police or not. And that kind of presented a moral dilemma for her. And it felt very natural for me, therefore, to present the hostage negotiator who is part of the police and what he might know. Um, and I think it was really interesting to kind of play them off against each other. So I think it's yeah, what I really liked about Niall in particular was kind of getting behind the kind of humanity of what is it like to be a hostage negotiator? What are their concerns? When do they feel like they're completely out of their depth? And he was dogged in his kind of determination to find out what happened and why. And so is Camilla. And they kind of almost both provide the reader with different pieces of information.
Yeah, and that's good because, like one of the things I like about this dual perspective that a lot of, when authors do it, is that it does add some sort of depth to what you're reading. I mean, obviously, one of the things about thrillers, aside from just like that heart-pounding feeling you get when you read them, rather, um, is you're trying to sort of figure things out as they go along. And it helps and it also hinders to have those two perspectives because on one hand, like Camilla she's somewhat biased because this is the man who she married and just had a child with. But then there's also the things that maybe she was ignoring or, like she's an unreliable narrator in that way, maybe to herself. With what she saw with her husband. And then there's Niall, who's just doing his job and he's done this before and he's supposed to be able to get into the heads of people who take hostages. And it sort of like adds to the different pieces of the puzzle, but kind of holds them separately, which is fun because it makes us work a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right that Camilla kind of wonders if she might have a blind spot for her husband. And to Niall, Luke is just clearly a criminal. And I kind of wanted to play off that kind of idea that, every criminal has they have a mother, and, some of them have wives. And it was kind of interesting to see like who are they at home and maybe there's kind of reasons for why they're doing what they're doing.
So the time jump is a very interesting idea. And not only does it sort of give you a little bit of room to explore the aftermath of being in this situation, being married to somebody who took hostages, and also Niall's situation, which, things don't necessarily go the way that he'd like them to go, and that's all I'm going to say. I really liked that you kept the story going and you kept the whole thriller aspect of it, but you were also dealing with the aftermath in real time. And that was pretty unique. So where did you decide, like at what point in writing did you decide there was going to be this time jump?
Quite early on in the planning, actually, because I think it would be a different sort of author who would make the siege last for the entire novel. I felt instinctively like the book needs to be cracked open, sort of between a third and halfway through, because I just think it's too long to make the reader wait for any answers at all. And actually, I'm always quite interested in the notion of aftermath and, kind of what happens to your relationships. Camilla becomes notorious, and that's interesting in itself, and it affects her working relationship and her relationship with her sister. And she's kind of, without wanting to spoiler it, she has unresolved business. And I really wanted to put like quite a long time span on that to see, you know, what that actually looked like and what that might do to somebody's psychology. And I do, when I'm planning a thriller, I do tend to dismiss at least the first 10 things I think of, because I think that's what everybody else is going to do. And so I kind of like to do, things that are further down on the list because they tend to be more surprising. And I like to sort of innovate if I can within the genre.
I loved Camilla's relationship with Libby, her sister. Loved it. Um,
Thank you.
you're welcome. No, it was good because they were very supportive, and I loved how much Libby not only, sort of was there for her sister, but also for her niece, for Polly, who I believe like really early on in the book, Camilla had, said something like she wasn't even a year old and her father's already either a criminal, a criminal, and it was nice to just sort of see that support system there. Um, but one thing I also really found refreshing was how well you wrote out almost like I don't want to call it denial, but almost denial in Camilla's head, and like just these feelings like, yes, he did a horrible, horrible thing. I still have feelings for him. He's still, like I'm trying to think about where this could have gone wrong, where this could have come from. The feelings felt very, very real.
Thank you. I wanted them to be, because I wanted him not to be not to have a dark past or any hint of why he would do this. I wanted it to come out of the blue, that, Camilla is expected to suddenly rewrite who her husband was. And kind of quite understandably, she can't do that, particularly because the nature of the note he wrote her is kind of a love letter. Um, and he was always the sort of stable influence in their marriage. He was quite sort of positive and optimistic and happy-go-lucky. And Camilla was sort of more anxious. So it's sort of doubly hard for her to believe that he could do this. And obviously, in the 7-year timeline, things emerge which lead her to believe maybe there was more to it than how it appeared at first.
I also wanted to mention, because I don't think it was mentioned before, that Camilla's job is in the book industry, in the publishing industry.
Yeah, it's I mean, I've been watching with interest the trend for writers writing about writing, and I've not really seen it done in a thriller, but I didn't just want to do it to kind of just to do it for its own sake. And so actually the title and the note Luke leaves for his wife are very related to the fact that she is a literary agent, but she's also his literary agent. And she feels in a unique position, therefore, to understand his communication. And as well as the note, it's about a lot of things that you would leave behind when you just kind of leave your life, and go and do something criminal. There's a lot of receipts and notes in, notebooks and Uber Eats receipts and all sorts of things that kind of can be, red herrings or clues depending on where the novel goes. So I really kind of liked that, the writing about publishing that I'm adjacent and I'm kind of on the outside looking into publishing in many ways, like authors are. But I also liked tying it kind of directly to the plot and making it almost a book about writing.
I also, and you kind of just touched on it, wanted to mention that I like the use of media and texts and just sort of ways to piece together what's going on or what the perspective is outside of the character's focus. That is a really nice touch.
Thank you. I kind of thought we do live in a modern world, and if I went and committed a crime tomorrow, I'd leave almost too much to read, Like if somebody were to try and look at even just a few days before I did something, there would be reams and reams of information, WhatsApps, every app you can think of, my emails, and I'm quite a communicative person, so I'm often writing on my phone. And I suddenly thought about where the clues could be within all of that stuff. Like we're just kind of used to everybody having this massive digital footprint today, but I kind of wanted to explore that in a thriller.
Well, this was a really, really good book. Are you like one of those people who is always writing, or do you take a break between your books?
No, I'm always writing.
Do you have
Always.
so you have something in the works for is it next year? Or are you like a yearly writer?
Yeah, so it's coming in January 2026. And I think it may be called Caller Unknown, but we're still debating the title. It's about a husband and wife who are British, but they're on holiday in Texas near to the Mexican border. And their teenage daughter is kidnapped. And they receive a very old-fashioned ransom, which says, "We have your daughter." They send a proof of life video, and it says, "Under no circumstances, tell the police." And the husband immediately wants to tell the police, and the wife reads the message and she communicates privately with the kidnapper that she is going to go and meet them and do whatever it takes. And what it takes is not a ransom, it's something else. So it's finished and done. So I'm very much looking forward to it being out in the world.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to talk about it next year.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on Turn the Page. Check out Famous Last Words. It will be here. Well, right now, this is it's not quite mid-February yet, but February is a short month. As of recording this, the book will be out in 15 days. So by the time you are listening to this, you should be running to your library or your bookstore, picking it up and tearing through Famous Last Words, because this is one that you are absolutely going to want to read. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.